Hi, greetings. It's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and today I want to talk about leading diverse teams. And we all are working on teams that are becoming more and more diverse every day. I can remember the first time I taught a class in college, how different the dynamics of my class was than what they are today. We are getting more and more complex in our workplaces, and today, as leaders of organizations, if we want to continue to grow our organizations, we really need to be able to understand how to effectively manage diverse teams. And so that's one of the main objectives of this course, is to really help us understand what it is that we need to know. We've been talking a lot about the different dynamics of what makes a successful team and how to manage diversity. And so I want to go back to the basics, share a few stories in here, and hopefully give you a few takeaways that will help you make this journey together with me a little more memorable and give you tools that you can use throughout your career. In my book, Diversity at Work, I start out by defining what diversity is. And there's a lot of different working definitions, but in my mind it really is about understanding and utilizing the unique contributions and talents of all of an organization's employees by creating a work environment where everyone is openly invited to be involved. I don't know about you, but I have worked for bosses who have made me feel like a number. And I know some of you probably have had all but great bosses, and that's awesome. And you probably are a supervisor in your capacity or a leader in some capacity, and we're all leaders in some capacity. And so really being able to learn how to be inclusive and leverage the unique talents and abilities of others, as we've been talking about, really takes understanding other individuals. And that means recognizing that we each have the ability to put a wall up in relationships and recognize our way of being. And so being an effective leader means you have to be able to and willing to transform yourself. And so hopefully by the end of this video you're going to have some different tools and greater understanding of things that help you become a more effective leader, even if your position isn't officially a leadership position. One, we need to know that diversity means strengths, and it means we have greater creativity and better ability to innovate, and innovation is simply putting that creativity into work, right? We need to understand that respect is earned, and relationships truly are fragile, and so in order to earn respect, you've got to do the right thing at the right time with the right people, and that means understanding what it takes. And so I like to bring up CQ as a cultural intelligence, because it really is all about really learning to understand what's important to other people. We need to assume the best in others. It's about perspective. And if we don't go into a relationship and an interaction with other people with the right perspective, we are the weak link on the team. And so we want to make sure that we are not putting up that wall, but we have the mindset that other people have good intentions too. Being kind to other people helps allow the flow of information with every interaction move a lot better. And so being kind to everyone really means no matter what they're doing, that you're doing the right thing by being kind. Recognizing biases is probably one of the hardest things, and I'm going to talk about a tool to help you recognize what your own biases are. I'll talk to you about some of mine. We talk all the time about effective communication. But effective communication really boils down to listening from their perspective. Too often we assume that other people, just because they are using the same words, have the same definitions and meanings and understanding. But as we work interculturally with other people, and that includes gender and backgrounds too, we need to understand that we may not be understanding things from their perspective. So being able to go back to the basics and reiterate what we heard in our own words will help clarify effective understanding, to gain that mutual understanding. We all have privilege, and we need to understand how privilege works. And so I've got a short story that I'll share with you if I have enough time, not to make this video too long, about privilege, which kind of puts privilege into perspective. And I know that we talk a lot about white privilege, and in academia especially, it's very Caucasian-centric in the way that we are, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to recognize that that's often our framework, and we need to recognize that there's a diversity of thinking that is just as valid. And if we are only coming from a Caucasian-centric perspective, we're only getting a small view. And then we need to understand that there are many different Caucasian subcultures too. And so we just cannot generalize people by looking at them. We need to be able to dive into relationships a little bit more in order to gain the best of them. So individuality really is what we are talking about on teams. When we can hire the most talented people and continue to develop people by focusing on their interests, we gain more of the benefit of what their individuality has to bring. A best practice associated in working with teams is to be a person of honor and integrity. That means don't speak badly about anybody else. If you really are assuming that you've hired the best people and you want to gain the best out of other people, being non-judgmental and not speaking badly about other people can help you bring out the best. I know that if I hear someone speaking badly about someone else, I'm always thinking, what are they saying about me when I'm not here? And one of the most important things, and I've probably beaten some of you over the heads with, is the platinum rule really is a solution rather than the golden rule. Too often, this is a paradigm shift, but too often we live in the world of do unto others as we would have them do unto us. Well, that defeats diversity thinking altogether. You're assuming other people think like you, and that's where the problems happen. Platinum rule thinking means you need to do unto others or treat others the way that they want to be treated. And that is a much better way to build long-lasting relationships. Our values affect our attitudes, which affect our behaviors. And so essentially, if you can remember values, attitudes, and behaviors, you'll be able to understand what's important to people. Recognizing that the best way to change the way people do things is to change their attitudes. And changing their attitudes can actually shape their values. So values are the hardest thing to change, and our values are shaped through our experiences throughout life. And if we're not actively looking at our own values and then changing them when we find that they aren't serving us well, we can hold on to our ego and continue to do what we've always done. But if we want to get even better results, we need to be the master craftsman of our own personalities. And that means we need to take a look at our individual behaviors and recognize how to use the tools that we learn in a college or university setting. So really being the best that we can be means recognizing that model that I've shared with you. Changing the way you do things changes your attitudes, which changes your values. For instance, maybe like in the Army, this is what I love, there are stories about sergeants who have had two people, maybe one person is white and the other person is African American, and they just hate each other, and everything they do tends to be clashing back and forth. And so the wise sergeant will make those two individuals do everything together, including scrubbing the latrine and peeling potatoes, or working out together to make sure they're doing the right things as they become better soldiers. And in working closer together, they can't help but see the strengths of each individual, and they can see the humanity that they bring and the positive things that they bring. And so the change of behaviors, working with someone that doesn't look like you, can change your attitude about that person, and which will essentially change the values of that person. I've got a great story that I want to share with you a little bit later, so I'm just going to tease you with that a little bit. So it's kind of a two-way model. You can change a person's values by changing what you do, in the example that I just gave, or you can change a person's behaviors by changing their values, or you can see what their values are through their behavior. So let's just face it, we are all in our minds, and our brains are developed out of safety. If you think about the caveman era, we had to always be thinking, do I eat that or does it eat me? And in order to do that, we are always, that looks very different, I should have caution about that. And so we, as intelligent human beings, really need to be thinking about how our brains work and reprogram our brains so that we can have the benefit of working with others. So starting with that assumption that other people really are good and differences are good can help us build stronger, more meaningful relationships. We need to recognize that differences mean strength. You may have seen me make the comment, or heard me make the comment, that conflict is good, but learning how to manage conflict, that's where you bring out the strength. And so going into conflict going, this person sees things differently than me, I might not know what I do not know. That's Gerhardt's window model, which I love. It essentially says we don't always know what we don't know. But having the benefit of stronger relationships with your team members means that you have the ability to start to see things differently if you can just learn to navigate the conflict a little bit differently. So essentially, always genuinely, because we all have BS meters, genuinely help other people feel special, because they are. Recognizing that every individual truly is special, and you should value them because it takes others to help us to grow. So as a leader or as a team member, have the intent of watching other people be their very best. Help them be their very best. And don't be quick to judge other people, but ask, go into things, you're doing things differently than I would do. Tell me more about that. Those are the little things that can help make things better. If you are assuming the best in others, you're probably going to get the best in others. So, I love the model of the street light. Red light, yellow light, green light. Red light, something happens. Yellow light, what will be a win-win situation? How do I know where this person is coming from? What can I do to effectively understand the other person's perspective so that we can create a third alternative, or something that's even better than what the other person is thinking? And then green light, taking that action, facilitate a win-win conversation and staying in the conversation longer. Pull your ego out of situations and truly be interested in understanding what a person has to give. But win-win also means that your perspective is valuable too. Being able to recognize your biases is probably one of the most powerful tools that we can have as leaders and team members. And so doing things by learning to manage first impressions. There's something called a halo effect, which means that, if you are putting your best foot forward, you're probably being seen as someone who is a quality person on a team, and that image is going to help manage the relationship throughout the duration of your time together, every time you spend together. And then there's the horns effect, which is just the opposite. If you don't give a good first impression, it probably can damage that relationship. And so you have to kind of be aware of that dynamics on how first impressions matter. I can remember a time when I was working with a student for the very first time. I was brand new to teaching college, and I had an African American female sitting in the front row of my class, and her arms were clasped, and you could see her body language was really not very welcoming towards me, her professor. And it was like that for about the first 2 weeks. And I had said in my very mind, I'm going to win that student over. And I taught my hind end off. And that student ended up taking like 8 different classes from me. And 2 years later, I saw her in the cafeteria. And she was like, Dr. Gerhardt, Dr. Gerhardt. And I'm like, hey, how are you, Karsha? And she said, I am doing so good. And I'm like, it's really great to see you. She says, I am about to graduate from community college, and I owe it all to you. And I'm like, you don't owe me anything. You are hardworking and super smart. And she says, no, I do owe it to you, because you may not remember this, but my very first day in college, I had you as my professor. And I wasn't so sure that I was going to stick with college or not. As a matter of fact, when I first laid eyes on you, I hated you. And I'm like, yep, I can remember that experience really well. What did I do? Why did you hate me? And she says, you didn't do anything. You were always very kind. You were very supportive. You were very student-centered. I knew you wanted the best in your students, but there was just something about you that I didn't like. But I told myself that I'm not a quitter, and I stuck with your classes, and I loved learning so much because you made me love to learn, and I learned so much from you that I took every single class that you had to offer. And I'm like, but Karsha, tell me, why did you hate me? What is it that I did? She says, like I said, you didn't do anything. But once I really thought about it, you look just like my ex-husband. And I hated that son of a bleep. And so I kind of laughed, and I said, wow, well, I'm really honored that you stuck with the class and that you gave me the opportunity to work with you over and over again. You're really impressive, and I'm really proud of your successes. But I like sharing that story because we all have biases. We all have things that could cripple our success unless we learn to really about our thinking. We call that metacognition, and really recognize why we do what we do. Do we really know what we don't know? I can remember being an 18-year-old kid and being a butcher in a grocery store. And I'm not proud of this story at all, but it really helped me grow as an individual as I think about, being the best that I can be. We really need other people to help us to stretch and grow and to see things differently, but we have to have the tools and the skills to be able to do that, and we need to recognize our biases. When I was 18, I was working in a grocery store, and I was a butcher. And I can remember crafting some beautiful meat counter of well-cut top round steaks. And a customer came up. She was driving one of those Lark shopping carts, the motorized shopping carts. And in her shopping cart, I can remember seeing things like Oreos and Ho-Hos and Cheetos. And she was sipping a big gulp, one of the big drinks. And she came up to me, and we had that top round steak that I had just filled my counter with. They looked beautiful. I took a lot of pride in my workmanship, and they were only 99 cents a pound. Of course, this was in the 1980s, and so that was a while ago. And she held up the steak, and she said, "Sir, will you cut the steak off of this, or the fat off of this steak?" And I looked at her, and I said, "No, I will not. There's too much fat on you." And so the next thing I knew, of course, my boss came around the meat counter, and he scolded me, and he helped me, put things back into perspective. Every single customer deserves to be treated with respect. And I knew that I was a hypocrite, because if that person had been like a 20-year-old in shape female, I would have gone, "Yes, ma'am, absolutely, I'd be happy to do that for you." And so it helped really illuminate a bias that I may have gotten from someone that I respected in my life, that may have made an off comment about someone who was overweight, and that may have justified putting people down in my mind. And I'm glad that I learned that lesson at a very young age, and I didn't get fired, by the way, but I could have. And I may have been the reason why they could have lost a customer. I don't know what the long-term effect of that is, but I do recognize that as a member of a team, we each have the ability to affect the success and outcomes of a team. And learning to manage our biases is a really powerful tool. We really must recognize that everybody can bring value, and everybody truly does have value. And we also need to recognize that we each have privilege in our own settings. A story that I had heard from a college professor is that he was once a football quarterback and for his college team in a small southern university. And he had picked up the newspaper, and he was walking with his best friends, who's African American, and he was reading the headline, "Don't go to Jake's bar because they're prejudiced." And he looked over at his buddy, who was also African American, and he said, "This is such a hogwash. I go there all the time. They treat me with respect." And his friend said, "No, that is absolutely true. They are so prejudiced. They don't even give me the time of day when I go over there." It's like, "Are you kidding me? We're both black. How could you mean that?" And the football player said, "Well, let's go over there and try out a test." And so the football player, he was quarterback, African American, the star of the team, goes in there, and everybody was cheering him on, and "Hey, let me get you a seat right here, clear it off, and I'll get you a picture of your favorite beer." And then, like 5 minutes later, as planned, his friend came walking in, and they totally ignored him. As a matter of fact, every time he raised his hand and said, "Can I have a seat?" they would say, "Wait your turn." And they would be really short with him. And of course, his football friend, observed the fact that this is what took place, and recognized that, the bottom line is, he recognized that he had privilege because the people who were in the bar were huge football fans, and perhaps they truly needed a paradigm shift, obviously, in recognizing that every person needs to be treated as a valued team member, if we're talking about teams, for instance. So I've talked already about the golden rule, which is the platinum rule. That means we really need to examine our paradigms and recognizing that not everybody wants to be treated the same way. I'm a big fan of telling my students, "Hey, you guys have done a great job. Let's go to my house and have my favorite meal. Free liver for everybody. I'll fry up the best liver, and we'll all have a good time and talk about what we learned in the class." And then half the students will go, "Oh, gross, liver. How could you do that? Do you hate me?" And the other students will go, "Oh, yeah, I like liver." So you have to recognize, and it's kind of a silly example, but living off of the golden rule may mean that you're damaging relationships. Living off of the platinum rule, treating others as they wish to be treated, helps build relationships. So we need to recognize that as team members and leaders, it's our goal to manage diversity effectively. We have to train and retain and attract the best human talent possible. It gives us greater organizational flexibility. It helps organizations gain greater market share. It helps reduce costs. It improves quality. It helps innovate more and create more. It helps better problem solving. It increases productivity. And it contributes to social responsibility. And the bottom line is it increases profits. So that's if you manage diverse teams properly. In order to do so, you have to recognize that diversity has many different levels. Everybody is different. That means you have to recognize cultures and subcultures. I have two sisters, and the sister that is closer to my age is more like me. And the sister that's several younger than me is very, very different. But if you assume just because we look very similar that we think the same, you could be missing the opportunity to be able to gain the best out of what we each have to offer. So you have to treat people like you truly believe that they are thoughtful and intelligent and truly deserving of respect. Be willing to admit what you don't know. Pull your ego out of things. Listen to people carefully. Accept responsibility for any misunderstandings. Notice and remember what people like to be called. For instance, maybe instead of calling people black, they prefer to be called African American or Asian or Korean or Chicano, whatever they are. You can't put people in any box. You have to understand how they wish to be recognized. Be non-judgmental. Give feedback to be sure what you heard and what you thought you heard. Paraphrasing back in your own words. Show that you really understand culture and admit that you don't understand cultural differences, what you don't. But put out the invitation to learn as much as you can from working with other people and understanding people from their own cultural perspective. Expect to meet people with experiences that are different than yours, and when in doubt, be more formal with other people. You have to recognize your own value. Euro-Americans generally value direct communication, and they tend to be a little more informal. So you have to speak up about problems and don't get too close or emotional. When working with Latino American values, there's this simpatico, getting along with other people thing, and there's a passion factor. So don't speak up about conflict. Express emotions and be tactful. With Asian Americans, generally speaking, and there's so many different subcultures of Asian Americans, but generally speaking, it's an indirect way to communicate. And you have to recognize that, generally speaking, there's more group harmony and group work that is expected. And so don't speak up about conflict. Be disciplined with your emotional expression. With African Americans, generally speaking, be assertive and speak up about conflict. Use emotional expression and recognize that there may be expressed anger about perceived unfairness, and so we have to hear other people's perspective. Have a solid strategy for moving beyond stereotypes and to create powerful connections. Get in touch with your stereotypes and prejudices. We all have them. It's how our mind works. Open your mind to other viewpoints and listen. Say to yourself, I may not know what I don't know. Learn about other groups as much as possible. If you're going to be working with other people, do the research and find out, what's in the literature and out there on the web, and start testing, what it takes to work better with people of different differences. Always express genuine respect and appreciation. Find ways to respect others and differences. Build trust. work with diverse people and recognize what those common goals are. Remember having high standards that are very clear. And then go with creativity and innovation. Seek collaboration, work towards synthesis, and create synergy. Being an effective leader means that you really need to recognize facts, beliefs, and values, and be able to learn to manage those differences and really understand what the facts are in order to gain the best of each individual. All right, so I've given you a lot of thoughts on being able to leverage diversity and to manage yourself as a leader and a team member. I hope you found something in this video worthwhile and that you've enjoyed our experience together. It isn't over until it's over. Don't ever hesitate to contact me. I hope that you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it. I'm Dr. Paul Gerhardt.